Dracula by Bram Stoker. Midnight was approaching as the carriage wound its way through a wooded pass deep in the Carpathian Mountains. Jonathan Harker, a young English solicitor, lay dozing in his seat, tired out. The journey from England had been a long one, and since his arrival in Transylvania, an eerie one too. A wolf howled in the distance, and Jonathan stirred uneasily. He'd heard much talk of wolves, vampires, and witches in this lovely but strange country. Only the night before, the innkeeper's wife had been horrified to hear where he was going.
Castle Dracula?
She had gasped.
Must you go?
Yes, I must,
Jonathan had replied.
Count Dracula has bought an estate in London, and I have papers for him to sign. He's sending a carriage for me tomorrow.
The old woman had hesitated, then put her own crucifix round his neck.
Then wear this, for your mother's sake.
Puzzled, Jonathan had agreed to please her. He could feel the cross now, under his shirt. The carriage stopped. Jonathan's heart leapt in fright. Wolves were all around, teeth gleaming, tongues lolling. All at once they began to howl. The black-cloaked driver jumped down. He gave one wave of his arm, and the wolves melted away into the darkness. He took Jonathan's bag from the rack and opened the carriage door.
Castle Dracula,
he said. Jonathan got out. Before him lay a vast, ruined castle, its broken battlements a jagged line against the sky. Not a light showed. Behind him, the carriage rattled away. He was alone. Jonathan waited. Before him stood a great door, studded with iron nails. Should he knock? It seemed an age before the door grated open. A tall man stood in the doorway, dressed in black from head to foot.
I am Count Dracula,
he said. His English was good, but he had a strange accent.
Welcome to my house, Mr. Harker. Enter, of your own free will.
Following the Count into a well-lit room, Jonathan found his fears vanishing. A log fire blazed in the hearth, and a table was set for supper. The Count opened another door, revealing a comfortable bedroom.
This is your room, Mr. Harker. First of all, please eat. Excuse me if I do not join you. I have already dined.
While Jonathan ate, the Count asked many questions about the journey. Afterwards, they sat by the fire. The Count's questions continued. This time he asked about Carfax, the estate he'd purchased in London. He also signed the documents Jonathan had brought. Hours passed, and still he talked. Dawn was breaking, when at last he stood up.
Sleep as long as you wish, Mr. Harker,
he said.
You may go anywhere in the castle, except where doors are locked. I must warn you, however, sleep only in your own room. Transylvanian ways are not English ways.
Jonathan was so tired he thought nothing of this strange warning. He slept late into the next day. When he awoke, he found a cold meal waiting. Of Count Dracula, there was no sign, nor yet were there any servants. That was odd. Who then had driven the carriage? Count Dracula himself? Dracula did not appear until evening. When he did, the young solicitor, his business completed, asked about his journey home.
You must not go yet, my friend,
cried the Count.
You came to settle details of my new estate, Carfax. Now I must learn about London. How I long to walk through her crowded streets. I know of her only through books. You must tell me more.
The Count questioned Jonathan far into the night. Only with the coming dawn did he allow him to fall into bed, exhausted. This went on for days. In daylight the Count was nowhere to be seen, and Jonathan slept. By night the Count was with him, talking endlessly. Jonathan never saw him eat or drink. One evening the young man was shaving when Dracula came unexpectedly into the room. He was not reflected in Jonathan's mirror. Startled, Jonathan let his hand slip and cut himself. The Count's eyes blazed at the sight of the blood, and he started forward. Then he drew back as he saw the crucifix at Jonathan's throat.
Take care how you cut yourself here.
His voice was a snarl.
It can be more dangerous than you think.
He was gone. Trembling, Jonathan went to the window, seeking fresh air. The castle stood on the edge of a precipice. Looking down, Jonathan was just in time to see a figure emerging from a window lower down. It was Dracula. He was crawling down the castle wall like a great bat. What kind of man was this? Thought Jonathan. He was filled with fear and foreboding. He must get away from this place, back to England and Mina, the girl he was to marry. Escape was not so easy. The great main door was locked, and though Jonathan searched, he could find no other way out. He was a prisoner. At length, as he went on searching, he found himself in a room he'd not visited before. He was worn out, and remembering the Count's warning to sleep only in his own room, he took pleasure in disobeying. Uncaring, he lay down on a silken couch. Time passed. Suddenly, he was not alone. The room was the same. His own footprints, and no others, were clearly marked on the dusty floor. Yet 3 lovely young women had appeared through a misty shaft of moonlight. They cast no shadows. All 3 had brilliant white teeth and red, ruby lips. Jonathan was filled with deadly fear, but he could not move. One of the women bent over him, and he felt her sharp teeth fasten on his throat. At that instant, another presence was in the room, Count Dracula. He was in a fury. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he threw the woman away from Jonathan, and waved the others back with the same gesture the driver had used against the wolves.
How dare you touch him?
Dracula hissed.
This man is mine. When I am done with him, then you may have him.
Are we to have nothing tonight?
One of the women wailed. Dracula pointed to a bag on the floor. It moved as if something alive were inside, and Jonathan thought he heard the muffled cry of a child. The women bent over it eagerly, mouths open, teeth glistening. They were about to feed on the blood of a child. It was too much. Jonathan fainted, clean away. Daylight was creeping through the castle windows when Jonathan came to himself. He was alone once more, but fear still filled his mind. He had to escape, and there was a way if he dared take it. Dracula himself had climbed down the face of the castle wall. Jonathan made up his mind to do the same. He stepped through the window onto the ledge outside. Below lay a sheer drop over the precipice, but there were footholds in the rough stones of the castle wall. While his courage was fresh, Jonathan began the climb, trying not to look down. After an age, he came to the Count's room, too tired to go any further. The room was empty, and he scrambled inside. In one corner, a door led to a dark staircase. Jonathan cautiously followed it downwards, and found himself in a dimly lit crypt. The floor had been freshly dug over, and great boxes filled with earth lay around. He counted 50 in all. In one of them, Jonathan saw something which filled him with horror. The Count was lying there. He was not breathing and had no heartbeat. Yet his face was gorged with blood, his lips were stained with it, and drops ran down his chin. Like the three terrible women, this creature fed on human blood. And he was going to London with all its millions of innocent people. He had to be stopped. Snatching up a shovel, Jonathan struck out at the hateful face. As he did so, the head turned towards him, dead eyes blazing with hate. The shovel turned in Jonathan's hands so that the blow was only a glancing one. Dropping the shovel in terror, Jonathan rushed from the crypt, away from the monster that was Dracula. Jonathan found himself back in the Count's room. The door to the staircase slammed behind him, and when he tried it, it was shut fast. A feeling of despair came over him. Just then, he heard the rolling of heavy wheels in the castle courtyard, and the sound of merry voices. Hope flared. A tiny window overlooked the courtyard, and he peered out. A band of gypsies had arrived. They seemed to know of some secret way into the castle, for they were bringing out the boxes from the crypt and loading them onto their wagons. Try as he might, Jonathan could not attract their attention. They finished loading. The heavy wheels began to turn, and singing all the way, the gypsies left.
Come back!
Jonathan cried in despair.
Help me!
They were gone. His heart sank. He knew that Dracula lay hidden in one of those boxes. Was this the first stage of the Count's journey to Carfax, his new estate in London? Now, Jonathan was alone in the castle with those three terrifying women, and soon they will be looking for more blood.
Oh, Mina,
He groaned.
will I ever see you again?
He got to his feet, his face determined. He would try to climb down the castle wall to the valley below. Then he would leave this cursed land and return to England and Mina. Far away in England, Mina Murray, Jonathan's fiancée, had just arrived in the Yorkshire town of Whitby. She was to spend a holiday with her friend Lucy Westenra, who had a holiday house there. Lucy, a lovely young woman of 20, could hardly wait to tell Mina her news. She had received 3 proposals of marriage in one day. All 3 men were close friends. The first, Dr. John Seward, was a clever young physician who was in charge of a London lunatic asylum. The second was an American from Texas, Quincy P. Morris. The third was the Honourable Arthur Homewood, son of Lord Godalming, and she had accepted him.
We are to be married in the autumn,
She told Mina, her cheeks pink with pleasure. Time passed pleasantly in Whitby. The 2 friends spent their time walking along the cliffs or sitting in the sun, looking over the town's rooftops to the sea. Sometimes they talked to the Coast Guard or to an old fisherman. July passed into August, and Mina began to worry. She had received only a brief note from Jonathan, and Transylvania was so far away. To make matters worse, Lucy had begun to have nightmares and to walk in her sleep. Mina could not understand why. One fine afternoon, as they sat talking to the old fisherman, a dark cloud covered the sun. A cold wind blew in from the sea, and the old fisherman cried,
"There's something in that wind. It smells like death."
By late evening, clouds massed in the sky. Sunset was so beautiful that people gathered on the cliff tops to watch, Mina and Lucy among them. Without warning, a storm broke. The sea raged, and the wind roared like thunder.
"Look at that ship!"
cried the old fisherman, pointing. A schooner, all sails set, was driving through the huge waves, heading for the shore. As it drew closer, the watching crowds gasped. A dead man was lashed to the helm. The schooner rushed on and drove hard onto the beach with a mighty crash. At that instant, an immense dog sprang up from below decks and leapt onto the sand. The crowds watched it race up the hillside towards the old churchyard. There it disappeared amongst the tombstones. All of a sudden, it was dark. Lucy shuddered.
"It's time we went home,"
Mina said cheerfully, taking her arm. The excitement of the night was not over. Lucy seemed disturbed and fell into a restless sleep. Around midnight, she left the house, walking in her sleep. Mina heard her go, and throwing on her dressing gown, ran after her. As she reached the old churchyard, she saw Lucy sitting on a seat near the gate. Then she caught sight of a dark figure bending over her friend.
"Lucy! Lucy!"
She called out in fright. The figure looked up, and Mina saw a white face and staring eyes. Then it was gone. Somehow, Mina got her friend back to the house and into bed. She was in a daze, and there were strange marks at her throat. The following day dawned clear and fine, and Lucy seemed quite herself again. In the morning they strolled down to the beach, where the stricken schooner still lay. Men were unloading great boxes from her hold, watched by the Coast Guard.
"Good morning, ladies."
He greeted them.
"Was anyone saved from the ship?"
Mina asked.
"There was no one aboard but the captain."
He replied, shaking his head.
He was dead. The vessel came from the Balkan port of Varna, loaded with these boxes. They are addressed to a house in London, so we're sending them on.
He shook his head again.
It's a strange affair.
Mina soon forgot about the wrecked schooner. A letter arrived that morning from Budapest. Jonathan was safe, but in hospital there. He was ill with a brain fever, following some frightening experience in Transylvania. "Mr. Harker has had some fearful shock," the letter explained. "He's recovering well and asking for you."
"I must go to him."
Mina cried.
"Will you be all right, Lucy?"
Of course you must go.
Lucy said.
It's time I returned to London in any case. Arthur will be expecting me.
Some time after Lucy's return to London, Arthur Homewood called on his friend Dr. Seward. A specialist in mental illnesses, John Seward had a house attached to an asylum. The friends often met there.
"I'm puzzled about Renfield, one of my patients.
John Seward told the other man as they sat talking.
I thought he was cured, but now he is acting so oddly.
In what way?
Last night he broke out of here and was found trying to get into Carfax, the house next door. It's a big place with an old chapel attached, but it's empty. When we got him back to his room, he kept telling us, 'The master is at hand.' Then he lay in bed smiling, watching a big bat flap around outside his window. Very odd behaviour. A pity, for he did seem better.
He looked quizzically at his friend.
But something is troubling you, Arthur. What is it?
It's Lucy.
Arthur said.
She's not at all well. I can't find out what's wrong. Will you see her?
Of course.
He saw the girl next day. Apart from looking a little pale, he could find nothing wrong with her. Yet she was certainly far from well. He sent a note to Arthur Holmwood. "I'm concerned about Lucy," it said. "I've asked Professor Van Helsing to come from Amsterdam to see her. He's an old friend of mine and an expert on mystery illnesses. Perhaps he can help Lucy." By the time Professor Van Helsing arrived from Amsterdam, Lucy had become very weak. Her face was chalk white, her lips bloodless. The Dutchman examined her, and his face changed when he found marks on her throat under the velvet band she wore round her neck. He took John Seward to one side.
She must have a transfusion of blood at once,
he said.
What's wrong with her?
Seward asked.
I think I know, but I hope I'm wrong.
The Dutchman replied.
I must look through my books and think. First the transfusion. After that, keep garlic flowers in her room.
Garlic flowers?
The young doctor looked amazed.
But why?
Trust me.
Van Helsing said.
Do as I say, please.
Mystified, John Seward agreed. Lucy seemed better after the transfusion of blood, but as the days passed, she needed even more. Hearing of her illness, Quincy Morris came to offer his help. He was shocked to see the change in Lucy. She talked of bad dreams and of a great bat at her window. The friends could only watch as she slipped away from them. At length, Lucy closed her eyes, and her breathing stopped. Arthur Holmwood was heartbroken.
She is at peace at last,
John Seward said quietly.
It is the end.
No, my friend.
Van Helsing turned to him.
I fear this may only be the beginning.
Lucy's funeral was over before Jonathan Harker and Mina Murray returned from Budapest. They'd been married there as soon as Jonathan had been well enough. The couple was saddened to hear of their friend's death. Mina kept a close eye on Jonathan. She'd been shocked to hear of his ordeal at Castle Dracula, and he'd been very ill. Now he was beginning to look better. The couple were walking in a London street one evening when Jonathan suddenly stopped dead.
What's wrong?
Asked Mina anxiously. Jonathan was staring across the street at a tall man with black hair.
It's the Count,
He exclaimed.
He's already here, in London.
Jonathan was trembling. Worried, Mina hailed a hansom cab and took him to Dr. Seward's house. Fortunately, he was at home, and Professor Van Helsing was with him. The two medical men listened in silence while Mina told them the whole story. They exchanged glances.
Did I imagine it all?
Jonathan asked in a low voice.
No, my friend, you did not.
Said Van Helsing firmly.
And your experiences would seem to have a link with Lucy's death. You say this evil being is now in London. I must hunt him out. I'm with you,
Jonathan exclaimed. Next morning, a London paper carried a frightening story of children being taken away by a beautiful lady. They were found afterwards with puncture marks on their throats. Van Helsing showed the paper to Dr. Seward.
What do you make of this?
He asked.
Something attacked these children.
John Seward exclaimed.
That something must also have attacked Lucy.
No, my friend.
Van Helsing shook his head.
How can I make you understand how Lucy died? Listen. There are many strange things in this world. In some places, There are giant bats, which take the blood of cattle and horses. Sometimes they even suck the blood of sailors sleeping on the decks of their ships. In the morning, the sailors are dead men, white as Lucy was.
John Seward stared at the Dutchman.
Are you telling me Lucy was bitten by a bat, and that such a thing is here in London?
I fear it is worse than that.
Van Helsing groaned.
I suspect that Lucy herself made the holes in the children's throats.
Are you mad? Lucy is dead.
You do not believe me.
Van Helsing shook his head sadly.
Tonight, after dark, we must go to the churchyard where Lucy is buried. Then you will see.